So our last speaker from this segment is Dr. Emily Kinney. Emily is a scientific writer at the DMKRCC at the Indiana University School of Medicine. Emily.
The big green button.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Okay. So for the DMKRCC, our perspective is really that what makes MPRINT unique is the services that we provide to improve research outcomes. And what I mean when I say improve research outcomes, I'm really talking about how we want to avoid the if only in every step of the research process. So I'm sure we've all been in situations where we've been reading published research and just thinking, oh my gosh, if only they had used this population, if only these people had been included in this study, if only they had a more clear data timestamps on their samples, if only they had better sampling, if only they had clear protocols described in the research, or even if more doctors knew about this. So for the whole circle, we really see MPRINT having a role in making sure that this whole circle of research is done really, really well and avoids those if onlys. So to do that, what we see our role being as in providing out-of-the-box tools, custom support, and promotion. So for our out-of-the-box tools, this could look like things like our knowledge base. It could look like Copper. We are really interested in, as we expand in the future, including more actual data sources, becoming kind of a hub for data, as well as just some of the resources, in addition to a researcher toolkit. So this does kind of get to what Dr. Nachman was talking about with where can we kind of collaborate and bring all of these tools together, all these resources that exist. And hopefully we can talk about that a little bit more tomorrow when it comes to our training session. And then of course, for custom support, we have so much expertise available within MPRINT, not just in the DMKRCC, but throughout all of the CETs as well, for project and trial design expertise, data analysis, data management, and then of course, funding. And finally, for promotion, like I said, for bringing things back into that clinical setting, we really want to make sure that we're closing that loop. So that might be through things like visual abstracts, infographics, social media promotion, probably things that we haven't even considered yet. So we are really excited about how we can help with every single step in that process. When we think about our roadblocks and what has kind of been our limiting factors to development so far, we kind of thought about it as how our collaborators are facing roadblocks. And when I say our collaborators, I mean that relatively broadly, anybody who might be interested in using MPRINT resources. And when we thought about what their journey would look like, we kind of borrowed from some marketing concepts of the customer journey. So starting with awareness, we want researchers to hear about MPRINT, probably come to the website, assess what resources are available. I have a thing on my screen, so I can't see that. We want them to be able to use MPRINT to create new knowledge. And then finally, we want researchers to be able to put that knowledge back into MPRINT. So that kind of is what we were talking about really creating a hub where we have resources, we have data, we have all kinds of information available in one spot. But when we think about roadblocks, not enough researchers are familiar with MPRINT. Our website really isn't great at selling the tools that are available. Not all of our tools are actually complete at this point, which is definitely a huge issue. We also lack the capacity to engage with everyone who is interested in our collaboration. I think it was Aaron who mentioned earlier that, Sarah and Lang don't want to be getting all of the emails all of the time. So there is definitely a capacity issue. And then also there isn't really a clear system at this time for researchers to put that information, those resources back into MPRINT. So when we think about how we can categorize those roadblocks, it comes down to one is capacity. We really would love to be able to have more support staff that would help us improve our website, improve our out-of-the-box tools, increase our promotion, give MPRINT researchers more time to provide some of that custom support. And then, of course, for buy-in, we really would love to see more researchers invested in MPRINT as a hub and providing that single spot for data and knowledge and resources. So when we talk about what can the NIH do to help us with these issues that we're facing, we talk about kind of the connections that we need to encourage networks to use MPRINT as a hub for gathering and promoting maternal pediatric medicine research. And we also want to develop internally within the DMKRCC a much stronger promotion kit so that anybody who does want to help us out with this question of how we build those relationships can do so a lot more easily. So that will be up and coming. And then finally, that was a joke with the money, but to some extent, there's always that issue of there is a limitation with staffing. So we really hope that future iterations of MPRINT can provide more staffing in order to provide more resources to researchers. And that is what we've got.
Thank you. So there's comments from the panel. Questions?
Great presentation. I'm not answering the question what NIH is going to do. That is my leadership's responsibility. But actually, I wanted to comment on how to improve the roadblocks to expand the network collaborations. So I didn't get a chance to comment on the Vanderbilt the CET presentation, but I think it's related to this. Is that so MPRINT Hub KRCC is the key to tie all the centers together, right? So to increase visibility of not only the KRCC, but also the CETs. So for example, that Vanderbilt has a great, I think, tools they have established for pharmacogenomics studies. So they have published that the approach using community engagement to enhance enrollment for both mom and children, for the pharmacogenomics study. I'm not sure all the investigators outside of the network, even within the MPRINT Hub, may not know they have these great tools. They actually established, I think, the video and tutorial on the YouTube. I think that's a great example to disseminate that, to share with the community and the other scientific community, outside of the MPRINT. So that is one example to suggest.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point that we are hoping, because you're right, even sometimes within MPRINT itself, there isn't always the best dissemination of information. And so we are hoping that we can really get more of that dissemination of information through really readily available resources. That's definitely one of our goals going forward.
I did tweet that paper, so my 200 followers are aware of that one.
So having the tools, I think, is great, and there's a lot of tools and cores in the network, and dissemination to increase knowledge about them is great. But then, how do you access them? Especially for within investigators within the network, that's one question. And then for outside investigators, if you're going to do a pharmacogenomic study, pilot study, or whatever, you need to get. I'm guessing there's no funding mechanism within the network except the pool opportunity funds to do these studies. So if someone at the MFMU who wants to do a PG study for a study, how do they access the MPRINT, and where's the funds going to come from? Because at the end of the day, I don't think MPRINT is going to do it for free. Maybe. So, but how do we, if we assume everyone knows about what everything is happening, how do you do it?
directly speak to the money part, and I think that Sarah might have a better answer for you. Maybe not, never mind, maybe there isn't an answer to the money question. But I think that you raise a really good point that there at the moment isn't a good way to say like, hey, I need help with this project. I have got this idea. What do I do going forward? And that, like I said, is definitely one of our goals going forward, to have a really clear answer for that. Hopefully you just go to the website and there can be something there that will say like, hey, do you need help with your research? Fill out this form. In fantasy world, it's really just that easy, but it's always easy in fantasy world.
Yeah, I will echo. I think one of the big things we have to do in the next year is redesign the website. Unfortunately, the platform we're using is not easy to redesign the website, but we all admit it needs more information. And I think what's on it now is what we want to do. So it's information from 2 years ago for the course. So one of my big goals that I've already written down is to get updated information from the course, so we have the resources they have now and a better way to link to that. But no, the funding is, through the opportunity and support pool funds. And I think that's another question we can get into in discussion is whether we're using that appropriately or we need to redefine that mechanism.
Ben?
Yeah, I've got a set of comments perhaps, and then two questions. So, one, in terms of thinking about money, I'll give, I don't know, a wet blanket or reality check. One, both the MPRINT KRCC as well as the CETs and the CRRP award did have essentially an opportunity pool or support pool of funds to support additional studies. So that is built into the network, some funds to support things. And we've seen some really good examples of use of that. In terms of, we would all like more money. The BPCA, which is one of the co-funding sources for the MPRINT Hub, has had a flat budget since 2002. When you correct for biomedical inflation, that's worth about, half of what it was 22 years ago. And as we heard this morning, there are a set of 15 recommendations with a detailed implementation plan for PREGLAC, which there's been no resources allocated by Congress for that. And I really like, I think getting to some of the things to think about today, and we'll really dive into this tomorrow at the closed session, is what should the focus of the MPRINT Hub be, right? Where are the, I would say, unique and most impactful places where it can do things, right? So we certainly can't do everything. So we need to be really selective. So that takes me to one question that kind of is a good thread that's been coming up in the last couple of hours, and that is related to our new approach to multi-site clinical trials. So, from the perspective, I would say, if we often hear from clinical pharmacologists, is really looking at the study design and doing an evaluation before we start a large clinical trial, especially a multi-year trial that's a high budget. So what would be a good point? I think I'll direct this to Majid and Nahida. What would be a good point for, hypothetically, a new study that the MFMU is submitting to engage with the MPRINT Hub? Because the MPRINT Hub does have internal resources and things that it's doing, such as curating drugs through the knowledge portal, building pharmacometric models. So that's within scope and something that can be, it's a prioritization, right? So what would be the best time for that to happen? Probably not the concept level, because you're like 80, but.
So great question. And what I wrote is communicate often and pre-planning, right? So I think one concept of improving the website so that outside investigators know what resources you have, what data you have, what is the capabilities that you have, so that as they're planning their studies, the PI of the MFMU is planning studies, they can go to that site and say, you know, this is a resource that I need. This is what I'm thinking of what I want to do. Who do I contact? That's also is who the, you know, who's the PI, who's the person that I need to reach out to put something forward, because it's early in the discussion, because by the time the concept comes in, you already have your partners, you already have your collaborators that you think you want to work with. So I think that's where I see it as a start. I think two is making sure that you're at steering committee meetings, you're at the table to share what new ideas, new resources you have available so that the investigators are aware. And because we have, the networks are a little more open, or I'm saying a little more, they're open, but a little more open, that you all as investigators can come and say, hey, Majid, I have an idea. Why don't we put something together? So I'll turn it to him.
I mean, that's great. That's the $1 million question, speaking of money. So, you know, I agree with everything Nahid has said in terms of the probably should be like a two-way street if you want. So we have a proposal going to the MFMU and then, you know, at the steering committee and even within ICHD, we're like, is this something that we need to get MPRINT involved in it? For example, if there's a azithromycin trial, you know, they're probably going to be doing microbiome studies. Okay, is this something that we have to do it at the PI site, or that's something that needs to go to the MPRINT and then do it at one of the cores of the MPRINT? So if the ultimate goal is to have the MPRINT as resources for investigators, then that would be an opportunity. And then the funding becomes another way. It's like how if an investigator is, you need to acquire funding to do this study, and there should be some kind of opportunity to do it at the MPRINT to kind of leverage all these resources that we're building, not just microbiome, proteomics, everything else that people are building. So that's one way. And also, like Nahida mentioned, if the investigator, the MPRINT, are interested in actually doing larger clinical trial based on the data that they have from their pilot studies, for example, then the MFMU is open to do these studies, or NRN or others. And I'm just going to give an example how Dr. Ren is aware of. She was during the OPRC times when we went to the MFMU to do a statin study to prevent preeclampsia. Some PIs said, well, we don't have enough pilot data on it. We don't have PK data. So we went to the OPRC, which was the predecessor of MPRINT, and we did the PK data and PD data. And we got all these information and went back to the MFMU, and the MFMU approved the study. So that's one way. It depends on the studies that is being presented. If there is yesterday there was DXA study, and there was question about the dosing. So that would be, the PI has actually another R01 to look at the dose of TXA and its PK. So could they have leveraged the MPRINT to do these kind of prelim studies?
I think there are a lot of factors that are working against investigators wanting to potentially reach out to, the networks under the BPCA program like MPRINT or PTN, because of the way the process is. I think it's just been being worked out, but it's a long, between the LOI and then the concept and the, approval by the network steering committee. And there's like 16 steps to get to submitting an application, which is not guaranteed that it's going to succeed. So, it's not surprising that they're not coming, in droves. So I'm wondering, are there ways, when you put up there, what can an ICHD do to support this? Making, I don't know if it's an explicit review criterion, but, somewhere it's the involvement of one of these programs, an asset to the application. That would be an incentive for someone going through all of the months and months and months of steps to submit an application if they knew, this would improve my chances. And ultimately it's better science if you've got the experts involved. I think it's a win-win, but, study sections, how they make decisions and rank things, I think is a little bit, you know, it's hard to control that, but I wonder if just kind of framing things that way, not necessarily making it a requirement, but at least encouraging, making that be an incentive to try to overcome some of the barrier, knowing how long this process is to get to a point.
So I know there are more questions over there, but just to answer that. Yes, so in the notice of award, notice of funding opportunity, right? So FOA and no FOA, it's still something that of our time with. There is encouragement of collaboration, right? So it's already in there. Part of the training for the SEP reviewers is that, you know, we explain the networks, we explain the network infrastructure, because a lot of reviewers are new to reviewing multi-site clinical trials. It's new to you all for submitting. It's new to reviewers to think about this. So it is of interest for us to collaborate with caveats, right? Your mountain of money will make it more of a hill because it's not a mountain, you know. So every trial that has multiple sites will have bigger budgets, right? And if you're doing more proteomics, PKPD studies, everything else, it's going to expand the budget, right? So that's one question, right? Is how do we do that in a way where you're collecting specimens during a study, which we've talked about, sort of collecting specimens on opportunities and just having sort of a separate budget for specimens, but that's not worked out. To think about, you know, just the collection component and then submitting secondary grants, R grants, et cetera, so that you can leverage what's already collected and test and do those studies. So the language is already there, but the reality of how things work and how that budget is going to be is what really the rubber meets the road.
I think we have a question from Aislinn, and then one more after, and then we'll maybe go to break.
Hi guys, it's me again. I'm at Indiana University, and I'm probably going to be one of the people that's working on updating the website. So I have more of like a survey type question for you. How many of you guys like use R and then use like that like Reddit-esque website to ask questions about your R code on it? I saw one person nod, so that's cool. How many of you guys thank you. Okay, this side of the room. How many of you guys have used Reddit to like look for an answer that you haven't found somewhere else? Because I definitely have a lot. Would it maybe be helpful to have some sort of interface like that where maybe you can communicate and ask questions and have some sort of ability to chat and have a forum?
r/MPRINT.
r/MPRINT, yes. Yes, no, maybe? Blank stares? You guys don't count. You work with me. Just throwing that out there. Thanks.
We do have that in parts of our knowledge base. I think the Copper and the knowledge base portal both have a chat bot or AI capability of some sort that integrate, but overall the website does not. So we'd have to, it's a good idea.
Hello, I'm George Liu from UCSD. I'm actually a newcomer here, relatively speaking. Also, in a weird, different way, I'm a basic translational researcher. So this is a great experience for me. So talking to Audrey, she encouraged me to also think about MPRINT 2.0 from a perspective of sustainability and expansion. After all, this is the great goal that we want to make this important and last for the next 30, 40, 50 years or so, right? So how do we do it? So some basic thing that was brought up is we need new people, we need projects that are related, but expand on what we have. We need money, but it's not necessarily just taking from MPRINT alone, but growing that money so we have influence in addition to the network. So one thought was coming to mind from my background itself is I look at a remarkable phenotype that's generated by MPRINT, human-specific data that have already found to be quite important, which as a basic researcher, we're looking for a little molecule and say, hopefully something will come out that relate that's important in human, which most of the time never come, right? Here, you already found those important, super important connection to human, which give you an effect, but a lot of time you already come with omics, tons of omic data, but with those pathway is already linked to potential hypothesis to be tested already. Gosh, for a basic researcher, that's a dream come true. You just go to the basic model, you crank it out, and you pair with somebody who does this and say, here's the basic translational thing, and that will drive new knowledge and also clinical importance. That's quite a lot of time fundable. So this, if we actually, what I see is probably a little bit of void in a more mechanistic study. We have great correlation study that are obviously already clinically important. We can have more mechanistic study that feedback on a human study again, and also on basic side, which I think a lot of time NIH would love to have. This will grow a new group of people getting involved in here because there's new hypotheses, new funding, because these are asking basic question and translation, which I think a lot of NIH would love to do, would love to see more input from the basic science side.
Thank you. Other comments? Yes, please. Elmika.
Sure. I was just going to add that that's a great idea. One of the things that I was thinking when listening to everybody is, as MPRINT, from an external view, I would love to see best practices coming out of MPRINT. What would all the various components of research in informing specifically how drugs are used in pregnancy and maternal space, what type of studies would we do? What's the best way to do these studies? We see a lot of data in the literature from a lot of investigators. If those were better informed studies, so even as we're talking about people working together, different investigators all around the world having access to what best practice is and how these studies will be done, or even in modeling platforms, if we could have an MPRINT really saying, you know, whether it's a PBPK model, what are the best practices in developing lactation PBPK models or doing certain aspects, and seeing more of that, to me, would be really ideal from just the expertise in the room.
I say, don't forget the work that Impact has done. So I want to talk to about Sharon, for Sharon, because Impact has done a lot of that.
I was just going to make a plea that the process you develop for external people to access the expertise matches what the NIH is going to tell people they should be doing, so that, for example, you have this concept document that has to be developed, which we heard about. I would suggest that's what should go into the so that people are already starting on the grant, and that what you see yourself as is looking for win-wins, where the external person is looking for a collaborator that you can both go look for funding, so that you're not doing this for charity, that you're both working to get funded. So that's just a suggestion. And then for the NIH, in my experience, the biggest problem with investigator-initiated trials is that they have no chance of getting any labeling or anything changed in practice, because they're not done in FDA-compatible ways. And that it's striking to me that the NIH presented a whole thing about how you want to teach people how to do good research, and there's no FDA input. I mean, the NIH should have a partnership so that anything that's done should be done compatible. In my example, when I first went to Cincinnati, I had a nurse writing data on the sheet, and it was in the NIH-funded clinical research center there. And I said, well, okay, but you're gonna have to cut that out because that's a source document. And she said, oh no, you're wrong. And we had a slight argument. And then her boss, who was the NIH-funded PI, came in and tried to explain to me why I was wrong. I called the NIH and they said, yeah, we're trying to get them to get consent first, and then we'll work on doing quality data. I'm not sure we've gone very far.
I'm happy to chat for 1 minute about the whole FDA submission stuff. So I think the first is, someone has to hold the IND. And if you don't have a process in place to hold the IND, you're never going to get to the FDA piece. And in our network, in the Impact Network, obviously we hold INDs on everything, 100%. And, I think of all of our studies, 70% of them are licensure. So we have a strong track record of being able to do that. But I can tell you that the volume of work that goes into that, the monitoring of the sites, the monitoring of the labs, requires an enormous effort, infrastructure, training, circling back, ETMFs. I can name you every acronym known to mankind. And the answer is it's just volumes of work. So I appreciate the issue with investigator-initiated studies and who can and do they hold the IND and what it means. But the expectation that an investigator will be able to do the processes to hold the IND and have it stand up to any kind of regulatory review is, as you said, slim to none, probably past none. So I really wanted to say that for those, we encourage investigators to come to the network, mine, perhaps others, and tell us what's your idea. And then we'll help you get that study accomplished. And two recent examples that we have are investigators that had actually a U grant or R01 who were told you'll get the money, but only if you go to the network. So we I want to say good news, bad news. We got money, but we got work. I don't know what that outcome was. On the other hand, what we also do, which is perhaps a bit different than MPRINT, is that we actually look at the RFAs that are coming out. Then we go, oh, I think Joe is going to apply for this. And then I called Joe up and I said, hey, I saw that CDC grant. I'm thinking you're applying and let's talk. And that pathway has been successful. And we've leveraged CDC funds with some funds from us to actually get the studies accomplished. And of the 4 groups that went in for that CDC grant, the 2 that got the best scores are the ones that we made them sit down, write the concept sheet. We reviewed it. We talked to them. We said, fix this, do this. And those 2 actually got the best scores. So, part of it is the network leadership has to be responsible for, I want to say, scoping out the RFAs when they come in, thinking who's applying. And now we're doing that. We're on our 3rd round of doing that. We've done it for monoclonals. We've done it for the CDC grant. We've done it for a TB grant. And, we're continuing to do that. And that takes understanding on the reviewer, on the leadership of the network that this is part of your job to look at the RFAs and sit there and go, oh my gosh, who's going to apply for this? Let me call them. So it's not easy. The IND work is for sure not easy. It cannot be taken lightly. And I want to say politely, probably can't do it as an R01.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that's exactly what I was proposing is that if MPRINT wants to do what it says, which is get labeling for pregnant women, they're going to have to do that. They're going to have this as a model, or there are other similar models, both ways, both going to people and trying to figure out how to find the people you don't know who could do it.
Sharon, so you said, sometimes investigators they get the R01, they're told, well, you have to work with the network before we give you the money. Who is saying, is that NIAID? Who is?
So actually, the 2 that came in that got funded, NIAID said to them, you can't do it unless you go to the network. And that was really successful. The CDC ones, we instigated, for lack of a better word, and said, you look like a great person to do this, but don't go it alone. And we'll give you our resources and just even the review resources. Even if the grant wasn't going to get funded, the review process itself made it so much of a better grant. And then obviously we put the layer of support saying that if these people get it, we're going to help continue, write the protocol, use our resources, our case report forms, or our infrastructure, because that's going to make it successful.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm so sorry. I'm going to switch over to my conference manager mode. I'm now conference manager. We do have to take a really quick 10-minute break and we will be back in 10 minutes and we will continue this as soon as Aaron finishes his sentence. It's break time. Aaron, go.
The funder's prerogative over the conference center
Absolutely.
project. Yeah, I'll just, I this is a really critical and I think very important discussion. And it goes back to the beginning of Bob's presentation, which went through the history of why the NIH under Mike Lauer wants to focus on clinical trials because, it's been published. The majority of the NIH funded investigator initiated R01s are sort of like, we need to do a larger study now. And I think as we're taking this new model and thinking about how we support multi-site clinical trials, and we, as Bob alluded to, we have a new office director for our Office of Clinical Research. I really think these are discussions that, we'll have to take inside the NICHD, but really think about these kind of approaches because how do we maximize the money that we're putting into our entire clinical trial endeavor? And I do, think there needs to be a bit more point of us as NIH program officers going, no, hold on, you go talk to this group, you go talk to this group, before we consider giving you a notice of award.
That. So for us, it's not RFAs per se, but it's large grants. So this is where our opportunity comes when a large grant comes in, because most of these trials are not going to be under 500K 100% of the time. So they come to us and we say, listen, we like this idea, but we need you to go through the networks. And so we need you to go through the PAR. And so that's what we're doing for a lot of our large grants. And I know Bob is there, but so just to say that we're trying to prevent the non-IND work to be done in our grants or the IND work to be done.
Thank you so much, everybody. We will be back right here at 3:13.